The planet called New Eden was everything humanity had dreamed of when they first looked up at the stars. It had blue oceans, green forests, and air so clean that the first colonists cried when they breathed it. 3 generations had passed since the first ships landed, and now 12,000 humans called this world their home. Governor Linda Morrison stood at her office window and watched the sun set over the capital city. She was 63 years old, with gray hair and kind eyes that had seen both the best and worst of human nature. She had spent her entire adult life building this colony, turning a wild planet into a place where families could grow and children could play without fear. The city below her was alive with activity. Farmers were returning from the fields with their harvest. Children were running through the streets, laughing and chasing each other. Old men and women sat on benches in the park, telling stories about Earth to anyone who would listen. It was peaceful. It was peaceful. It was beautiful. It was home. Commander Jake Harris walked through the military district with a troubled mind. He was 34 years old, tall and strong, with short brown hair and eyes that never seemed to rest. He had joined the Colonial Defense Force at 18, and 16 years of service had taught him to trust his instincts. Right now, his instincts were screaming that something was very wrong. The source of his worry was the Velthari Dominion. They were an ancient alien civilization that controlled hundreds of star systems. Their ships had first appeared in human space 5 years ago, and since then, they had presented themselves as wise and peaceful beings who only wanted friendship with the younger races of the galaxy. Jake did not believe them. He had studied the Velthari carefully. They were tall creatures, standing nearly 7 feet high, with bodies covered in hard shells like insects. Their eyes were large and compound, made of thousands of tiny lenses that reflected light in disturbing ways. When they spoke, their mouths clicked and buzzed, and their translators turned these sounds into words that always seemed too smooth, too careful. What bothered Jake most was how they looked at humans. He had seen Velthari diplomats watching human children play, and there was something cold in their gaze. They asked strange questions about how fast humans grew, how many children a family could have, and how long humans lived. They seemed very interested in the fact that humans rarely lived past 100 years. Jake had brought his concerns to Governor Morrison many times. She always listened patiently, but she did not share his fears. She believed that the Velthari were simply curious about a species so different from themselves. She reminded him that fear of the unknown had caused many tragedies in human history, and that humanity should not repeat those mistakes with alien civilizations. Today, the Velthari had made a request that made Jake more nervous than ever. They wanted to send 50 ambassadors to live among the colonists for several weeks. They called it a cultural exchange program. They said they wanted to learn about human customs, human art, and human family life. The Colonial Council had approved the request by a vote of 7-2. Jake had been one of the 2 who voted against it, but democracy had spoken. The Velthari ambassadors would arrive in 3 days. Jake stopped at a small cafe and ordered coffee. He sat at a table near the window and watched the people walking by. A young mother pushed a stroller with twins inside. An old man with a cane walked slowly toward the park. A group of teenagers laughed about something on their phones. These were the people Jake had sworn to protect. He did not know why the thought of the Velthari made him so afraid for them, but the feeling would not go away. His communicator buzzed. It was a message from his mother, asking if he would come to dinner on Sunday. She lived in the retirement community on the east side of the city, a quiet neighborhood where the oldest colonists spent their final years in comfort. Jake smiled and typed a quick reply saying he would be there. Then he received another message, this one from his sister. She was asking if he could pick up his niece from school tomorrow because she had a doctor's appointment. His niece was named Lily, and she was 7 years old. She had bright red hair, a gap-toothed smile, and more energy than any three adults combined. She called Jake her favorite uncle, even though he was her only uncle. Jake replied that he would be happy to pick up Lily. He finished his coffee and walked back to the military base, trying to push his worries aside. 3 days later, the Velthary ambassadors arrived. Their shuttle descended from orbit and landed at the spaceport with perfect precision. The 50 ambassadors emerged in a single line, their movements synchronized in a way that seemed almost mechanical. Governor Morrison greeted them with a warm smile and a speech about friendship between species. The lead ambassador, a Velthary named Crix, responded with words about cooperation and mutual understanding. The translators made his voice sound pleasant, but Jake noticed that his compound eyes never stopped scanning the crowd. The ambassadors were assigned to different parts of the colony. Some went to the schools to observe human education. Others went to the farms to study human agriculture. A few were invited into family homes to experience human domestic life. Everyone treated them with kindness and hospitality. The colonists of New Eden were good people who believed in giving strangers the benefit of the doubt. They had no reason to suspect that they were welcoming death into their homes. In the days that followed, the Velthary asked many questions. They wanted to know where the elderly lived. They wanted to know when the children attended school. They wanted to know the layout of every building in the colony. They said they were curious. They said they were writing reports for their government. They said they wanted to understand humanity better. Nobody noticed that they were actually planning a massacre. Jake continued to watch them closely, but even he did not guess the truth. He saw them studying the retirement community with great interest, but he assumed they were fascinated by how humans cared for their old. He saw them spending hours near the schools, but he thought they were simply observing human children at play. He did not know that in Velthary philosophy, a species was judged by its weakest members. He did not know that the Velthary considered short-lived species to be vermin that bred too quickly and threatened galactic stability. He did not know that the High Council of the Dominion had already decided that humanity must be broken before it could spread any further, and he did not know that the breaking would begin with the murder of everyone he loved. The morning began like any other morning on New Eden. The sun rose over the mountains and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. Birds sang in the trees. Farmers walked to their fields. Parents woke their children and prepared them for school. Nobody knew that this would be the last normal morning the colony would ever see. Jake Harris was in the outer agricultural district, inspecting a new irrigation system with his engineering team. It was boring work, but it needed to be done. The colony depended on its farms, and the farms depended on water. At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, the Velthary ambassadors revealed their true purpose. In the retirement community, an old woman named Martha was watering her flowers when a Velthary approached her. She smiled at him and asked if he would like to see her garden. The Velthary pulled a weapon from beneath his robes and shot her in the chest. She was dead before she hit the ground. All across the retirement community, the same scene repeated itself. Velthary ambassadors pulled out neural disruptors that had been hidden in their clothing. These weapons had been smuggled past colonial security in pieces and assembled in secret. They made no sound when fired. They left no marks on the bodies. They simply stopped the heart and shut down the brain. The elderly colonists had no chance to defend themselves. They were killed in their homes, in the gardens, in the community center where they gathered to play cards and share memories. 312 old men and women died in less than 10 minutes. Governor Linda Morrison was in her office when a Velthary ambassador entered. She looked up from her desk and started to greet him, but she saw the weapon in his hand and understood immediately what was happening. She reached for her communicator to send a distress signal, but the Velthary fired before her fingers could touch it. The governor fell back in her chair, her kind eyes staring at nothing. The Velthary looked at her body for a moment. then turned and walked out to find more targets. At the Colonial School, 243 children were gathered in the auditorium for the annual Spring Festival. The youngest were only 4 years old. The oldest were 14. They wore costumes they had made themselves and carried flowers they had picked from the school garden. Lily Harris sat in the front row with her best friend. She was wearing a crown made of paper and glitter, and she was very excited because her class was going to perform a song about springtime. She kept looking at the door, hoping her Uncle Jake would surprise her by showing up early. The doors opened, but it was not her uncle who walked in. 12 Velthri entered the auditorium in a single line. The teachers assumed they were there to observe the festival and welcomed them with smiles. Then the weapons appeared, and the smiling stopped. The children did not understand what was happening at first. They saw the bright flashes of light and heard the teachers screaming. They saw their friends falling to the floor and not getting back up. Some of them tried to run, but the doors had been locked from outside. It took less than 5 minutes to kill every child in the auditorium. When the killing was done, the Velthri gathered at the spaceport. They had completed their mission. The old and the young of the human colony had been eliminated. According to their philosophy, this would break the spirit of the survivors and make them easy to control. They did not bother to hide what they had done. They wanted the humans to know. They wanted the humans to understand that resistance was pointless. They wanted the humans to submit. Jake Harris heard the emergency sirens while he was still in the agricultural district. He tried to contact the military base, but all channels were jammed. He tried to call his mother, but there was no answer. He tried to call his sister, but she was screaming too loudly to speak. He commandeered a transport vehicle and drove toward the city at maximum speed. The journey took 20 minutes, and every second felt like an hour. When he arrived at the retirement community, he found only bodies. He searched through them with shaking hands until he found his mother. She was lying in her garden, surrounded by the flowers she had loved so much. Her eyes were closed, and she looked almost peaceful, as if she was only sleeping. Jake knelt beside her and held her hand. It was already cold. He wanted to cry, but the tears would not come. Something inside him had gone quiet and still, like the calm before a terrible storm. He remembered that Lily had been at school today. He drove to the school so fast that the vehicle nearly crashed twice. When he arrived, he found a crowd of parents gathered outside, wailing and beating on the locked doors. Colonial security officers were trying to break through, but the Velthri had sealed the building well. When they finally got inside, Jake pushed through the crowd and entered the auditorium. What he saw there would haunt him for the rest of his life. He found Lily near the stage. Her paper crown was still on her head, though it had been knocked to one side. Her eyes were open, and there was a look of confusion on her small face, as if she did not understand why her uncle had not come to save her. Jake gathered her small body in his arms and held her close. Around him, parents screamed and sobbed as they found their own children. The sound of grief filled the auditorium like a physical weight. Outside, the Velthri broadcast their message to the colony. They announced that humanity had been judged and found to be a threat to galactic order. They declared that the colony was now under Velthri control. They demanded immediate surrender and promised that those who obeyed would be allowed to live as servants of the Dominion. The surviving colonists gathered in the central square. There were just over 8,000 of them now. They had lost their governor, their elders, and their children in a single morning. They had every reason to collapse into despair and surrender, but something strange happened as they stood together in silence. Jake Harris walked to the front of the crowd. He was still carrying Lily in his arms. His uniform was stained with her blood, and his face was as hard as stone. He looked at the survivors, and they looked back at him. He saw the grief in their eyes, but he saw something else too. He saw a cold, quiet anger that burned hotter than any fire. He understood then that the Valkyrie had made a terrible mistake. They had studied humanity, but they had not understood humanity. They thought that killing the weak would break the strong. They did not know that humans were not like other species. They did not know that grief could become fuel, that sorrow could become strength, that a broken heart could become a weapon more dangerous than any technology. The Valkyrie had murdered the children of New Eden. Now humanity would teach them why that was the worst mistake any species could ever make. The Valkyrie expected the humans to surrender within hours. They had used this strategy on other species before, and it had always worked. Kill the old, kill the young, and the rest will bow their heads and accept their fate. They waited at the spaceport for the colonial leaders to come and negotiate terms. They prepared documents that would make the humans into a slave species. They congratulated each other on a successful mission. Hours passed. No one came. Instead, something unexpected happened. The colonial defense forces began to mobilize. The remaining adults organized themselves into units. The civilian population started moving supplies and weapons to strategic locations. Far from collapsing, the humans seemed to be preparing for war. Commander Jake Harris had been promoted to acting military commander after the death of his superiors. He had not slept since finding Lily's body. He had not eaten. He had not cried. He had simply worked, hour after hour, organizing the survivors and preparing for what was to come. The colonial defense vessel Retribution was an old ship, built for patrol duty and minor peacekeeping operations. It had never fired its weapons in combat. Now it hung in orbit above New Eden, its crew of 200 ready to fight against an enemy with thousands of warships. Jake stood on the bridge and looked at the main screen. It showed the Valkyrie shuttle still sitting at the spaceport, and beyond it, the dark shape of a Valkyrie destroyer that had arrived to oversee the conquest. His communications officer told him that the Valkyrie were demanding to speak with whoever was in charge. They wanted to know why the humans had not surrendered yet. Jake nodded slowly. He told his officer to open a channel, not just to the Valkyrie, but to everyone. He wanted this message broadcast across all frequencies. He wanted it recorded and transmitted to Earth. He wanted the entire galaxy to hear what humanity had to say. When the channel opened, Jake did not raise his voice. He did not shout or threaten or make dramatic gestures. He spoke quietly, calmly, like a man who had moved beyond anger into something colder and more dangerous. He addressed the High Council of the Valkyrie Dominion directly. He told them that humanity had received their message and understood what they wanted. He told them that he was authorized to give them humanity's answer. Then he paused for a moment. Before continuing, he said that the Valkyrie had made a serious error in judgment. They had studied human biology and concluded that a species with such short lifespans must be weak. They had observed human children and decided that such small creatures must be unimportant. They had looked at human elders and seen only useless old bodies waiting to die. They'd understood nothing. Jake explained that humans did not measure the value of life by years. A child who lived for 7 years could be more precious than all the wealth in the galaxy. An elder who lived for 90 years carried more wisdom than any ancient species could imagine. When you killed a human child, you did not remove a problem. You created an enemy that would never stop, never forgive, and never forget. He told them about human history. He told them about the empires that had tried to conquer humanity through terror and cruelty. He told them about the Assyrians, who had built pyramids of human skulls. He told them about the Mongols, who had burned entire cities. He told them about the Third Reich, which had tried to exterminate entire groups of people. Every one of those empires had fallen. Every one of those conquerors had been defeated. Not because humans were stronger or smarter, but because humans simply refused to give up. When pushed to the edge of extinction, humanity did not surrender. Humanity pushed back. Jake told the Valkyrie that they had 48 hours to leave the Kepler system. After that time, any Valkyrie vessel in human space would be destroyed on sight. He told them that this was not a negotiation. This was not a threat. This was simply a statement of fact. Then he ended the transmission. The message traveled at the speed of light toward the Sol system. It passed through relay stations and communications networks. It was picked up by human colonies throughout the region. And 42 days later, it reached Earth. The reaction was unlike anything in human history. For centuries, humanity had been divided. Nations competed with each other. Political parties fought for power. Religions disagreed about the nature of existence. Corporations pursued profit. Individuals pursued their own interests. Unity had always been a dream, never a reality. The news from New Eden changed everything. When people heard about the massacre, something shifted in the collective human soul. Parents looked at their own children and imagined them lying dead on a school floor. Adult children looked at their elderly parents and imagined them murdered in their homes. The horror was universal. The anger was universal. And for the first time in history, humanity spoke with one voice. The United Human Federation had been a loose organization that coordinated between colonies and managed interstellar trade. Within 1 week of the message arriving on Earth, it was transformed into a unified government with absolute authority over all human military forces. Admiral Chris Palmer was appointed Supreme Commander of the newly formed Human Expeditionary Force. He was 58 years old, a veteran of border conflicts and peacekeeping missions. He had spent his career trying to avoid war. Now he would lead humanity into the largest war it had ever fought. Factories across 100 worlds stopped making consumer products and started making weapons. Scientists who had been working on theoretical research were redirected to military applications. Every shipyard in human space began constructing warships. Every military academy began training new soldiers. Volunteers overwhelmed the recruitment centers. Young men and women who had never thought about military service suddenly wanted to fight. Old veterans who had retired decades ago came out of their homes and demanded to serve again. Even civilians with no combat skills offered to help in any way they could. The Valkyrie had calculated that humanity would need at least 10 years to build a military force capable of challenging the Dominion. They had assumed that human divisions would prevent any unified response. They believed that grief would weaken humanity rather than strengthen it. They were wrong about everything. Within 6 months, the first human battle fleet was ready to launch. Admiral Palmer addressed the assembled forces from his flagship. He told them that they were not fighting for territory or resources or political power. They were fighting for the children who would never grow up. They were fighting for the elders who would never share their wisdom again. They were fighting to show the galaxy that humanity protected its own. The fleet jumped to faster-than-light speed and headed toward Valkyrie space. The war had begun. The Valkyrie Dominion had ruled its portion of the galaxy for 6,000 years. They had conquered dozens of species and absorbed hundreds of worlds into their empire. Their military was vast, their technology was advanced, and their commanders had centuries of experience in warfare. They looked at the approaching human fleet and felt no fear. High Admiral Rex commanded the Valkyrie Defense Forces from his flagship, a massive vessel called the Eternal Order. He had studied the reports about human capabilities and found nothing impressive. Human ships were small and lightly armored. Human weapons were primitive compared to Valkyrie technology. Human soldiers had almost no combat experience against alien species. He expected the war to be over within a few weeks. He was very wrong. The first battle took place in the Corvin system, a Valkyrie outpost that served as a supply depot for their military operations. Rex sent a fleet of 50 warships to intercept the human forces, confident that this show of strength would make the humans retreat. Commodore Jake Harris led the human vanguard. His task force consisted of 30 ships, all smaller than the Valkyrie vessels they faced. By every measure, he should have lost the battle quickly. Instead, the humans did something the Valkyrie had never seen before. They split into small groups and attacked from multiple directions at once. They moved constantly, never staying in one place long enough for the Valkyrie weapons to lock on. They ignored the larger enemy ships and focused on supply lines and communication relays. The Valkyrie commanders tried to respond, but their tactics were based on overwhelming force and intimidation. They did not know how to fight an enemy that refused to stand still. They did not understand why the humans kept attacking even when they took damage. They could not comprehend soldiers who seemed completely unafraid of death. The battle lasted 12 hours. When it ended, the Valkyrie had lost 32 ships. The humans had lost 8. The supply depot was destroyed, and the surviving Valkyrie forces retreated in confusion. High Admiral Rex received the news with disbelief. He ordered a full analysis of the battle and demanded to know how such a thing was possible. The answer came from Dr. Kethen, a Valkyrie scientist who specialized in studying other species. He explained that the humans were fighting differently because they thought differently. Most species in the galaxy valued self-preservation above all else. When faced with superior forces, they would retreat or surrender to save themselves. Humans did not think this way. They had evolved on a dangerous planet where survival often required taking extreme risks. They had developed concepts like sacrifice and honor that did not exist in Valkyrie culture. When a human believed in a cause, they would die for it without hesitation. Dr. Kethen warned that the humans were not fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting for revenge. And a species fighting for revenge was the most dangerous enemy imaginable. Rex dismissed these concerns. He believed that superior technology would eventually overcome human determination. He ordered his fleets to concentrate their forces and crush the human invaders with sheer numbers. But the humans had already adapted to Valkyrie tactics. Lieutenant Amy Chun commanded a fighter squadron called the Red Dragons. She was 26 years old, born on the colony of New Shanghai, and she had lost her younger brother in a Valkyrie raid 3 months after New Eden. She flew her small fighter craft with a skill that amazed even veteran pilots. In the Battle of Krethis Prime, Amy led her squadron directly into the heart of a Valkyrie carrier group. The Valkyrie commanders assumed she was attempting suicide and did not bother to redirect their main weapons. This was a mistake. Amy and her pilots weaved between the massive Valkyrie ships, targeting their engine systems and weapons arrays. They were too small and too fast for the heavy Valkyrie guns to track. Within 30 minutes, they had disabled 3 capital ships and destroyed 2 more. When Amy returned to her carrier, she was asked how she had found the courage to attempt such a dangerous attack. She simply said that courage had nothing to do with it. When you had already lost everything that mattered, fear became meaningless. The only thing left was the mission. Across the front lines, similar stories repeated themselves. Human soldiers fought with a ferocity that the Valkyrie could not match. Human commanders developed new tactics that exploited every weakness in Valkyrie strategy. Human engineers modified their weapons and ships in ways that should have been impossible given their limited resources. The Valkyrie began to lose ground. System after system fell to human forces. Their supply lines were cut. Their communication networks were disrupted. Their commanders, who had never experienced real resistance, started to panic. Ground forces landed on Valkyrie colony worlds with specific orders. They were not there to conquer or occupy. They were there to find the individuals responsible for the New Eden massacre. Captain Samuel Drake led one of the ground teams. He was a former police detective who had volunteered for military service after seeing the footage from New Eden. His job was to identify Valkyrie war criminals and bring them to justice. The process was methodical and precise. Human intelligence officers had compiled a list of every Valkyrie who had participated in the massacre. They had traced their movements, identified their locations, and prepared arrest warrants. When human forces captured a Valkyrie world, the first priority was finding these individuals. Military tribunals were held on captured Valkyrie ships. The accused were given the opportunity to defend themselves. Evidence was presented. Witnesses testified. The proceedings were recorded and broadcast across the galaxy so that everyone could see that humanity was not seeking blind vengeance, but justice. When guilty verdicts were returned, the sentences were carried out immediately. The executions were not cruel or prolonged. They were simple and final, just like the murders at New Eden had been. Dr. Kevin Brooks, a human scientist who studied alien psychology, was assigned to interview captured Valkyrie officers. He wanted to understand how a civilization could commit such atrocities without remorse. What he found disturbed him deeply. The Valkyrie genuinely did not understand what they had done wrong. In their worldview, eliminating a dangerous species was simply good policy. Killing children and elders was efficient and practical. They had no concept of innocent civilians or protected groups. To them, the massacre was not a crime. It was pest control. Kevin included these findings in his reports to command. He warned that the Valkyrie would never truly understand human morality. They would never feel guilty for what they had done. They would only regret that their plan had failed. This meant that the war could not end with negotiation or compromise. It could only end when the Valkyrie were completely unable to threaten humanity ever again. Admiral Palmer read the reports and understood what had to be done. He ordered the fleet to advance toward Velthor Prime, the homeworld of the Dominion. The final battle was approaching. The Valkyrie had started this war by killing human children. They had believed that this would make humanity weak. Now they would learn the true meaning of human strength. 2 years had passed since the massacre on New Eden. 2 years of war, suffering, and death. 2 years of humanity showing the galaxy exactly what happened when you threaten their children. Commodore Jake Harris stood on the bridge of his flagship, the carrier Avenging Light. Through the main view screen, he could see the planet below. It was Velthor Prime, the ancient homeworld of the Dominion, a world that had ruled this region of space for 6,000 years. Human warships surrounded the planet in a sphere of steel and fire. There were over 2,000 vessels now, far more than anyone had thought possible when the war began. The factories of Earth and the colonies had worked without rest. The people of humanity had given everything they had. And now, at last, they had reached the heart of the enemy. The Valkyrie defense fleet had been destroyed in a series of battles over the past month. Their last admiral had died when his flagship exploded under concentrated human fire. Their orbital defense stations had been reduced to burning wreckage. There was nothing left to protect the homeworld. Admiral Chris Palmer contacted Jake from his command ship. He told Jake that the Valkyrie High Council was requesting communication. They wanted to discuss terms for ending the war. Jake felt something stir in his chest, something cold and hard that had lived there since the day he found Lily's body. He told the Admiral that he would take the communication personally. Palmer agreed and transferred the channel. The view screen flickered, and the image of a Valkyrie appeared. Jake recognized him from intelligence reports. This was High Counselor Rex, the leader of the Dominion and the being who had authorized the New Eden massacre. Rex spoke through his translator in a tone that was meant to sound reasonable and dignified. He acknowledged that the war had not gone as the Dominion had expected. He praised human military capabilities and expressed respect for their determination. He proposed a ceasefire that would allow both sides to negotiate a peaceful resolution. He offered reparations for the unfortunate incident at New Eden. He offered territorial concessions that would give humanity control of several valuable systems. He offered a formal apology from the Dominion government. He offered to recognize human sovereignty and promised that the Velthari would never interfere with human affairs again. When he finished speaking, he waited for Jake's response with the confidence of someone who believed he was offering a generous deal. Jake was silent for a long moment. He looked at the image of the alien who had ordered the death of his mother and his niece. He thought about Governor Morrison, who had only wanted peace. He thought about the 312 elders who had been murdered in their homes. He thought about the 243 children who had died at their spring festival. Then he began to speak. He told Zrex that humanity had considered the offer carefully. He told him that they understood the Velthari believed they were being generous. He told him that, by Velthari standards, this was probably a reasonable peace agreement. But humanity did not operate by Velthari standards. Jake explained that the reparations offered could not bring back the children who had died at New Eden. No amount of territory could restore Governor Morrison to life. No apology could give the elders back the years that had been stolen from them. He said that there was a 7-year-old girl named Lily who had worn a paper crown to her spring festival. She had been excited to sing a song for her family. She had been waiting for her uncle to arrive. She had died confused and afraid, not understanding why the tall aliens were hurting her friends. No reparation could give Lily the chance to grow up. No treaty could give her the life she should have lived. No words could undo what the Velthari had done. Jake told Zrex that humanity did not want territory or wealth or submission. Humanity wanted the Velthari to understand something fundamental about the species they had attacked. When you hurt humans, they did not forget. When you killed their children, you did not break their spirit. You awakened something ancient and terrible, something that had been forged in thousands of years of struggle and survival. He told Zrex that the Velthari Dominion would be dissolved. Their military would be dismantled. Their weapons would be destroyed. They would be forbidden from building warships or training soldiers for 1,000 years. Human forces would not occupy Velthari worlds permanently. They had no desire for empire, but they would establish monitoring stations throughout Velthari space. They would watch. And if the Velthari ever threatened another species the way they had threatened humanity, the response would be swift and final. Zrex protested. He said that such terms were unprecedented in galactic history. He said that no civilization had ever imposed such conditions on another. He said that the Velthari would become a weak and vulnerable species, unable to defend themselves against other threats. Jake nodded slowly. He said that was correct. For the next 1,000 years, the Velthari would have to rely on the protection of other species, including humanity. They would have to learn what it felt like to be at the mercy of beings more powerful than themselves. Maybe then they would understand why killing children was wrong. The communication ended. Within hours, human forces began the occupation of Velthari orbital stations. The Dominion government surrendered unconditionally. The war was over. 1 year later, on the 3rd anniversary of the massacre, Jake Harris returned to New Eden. The colony had been rebuilt, larger and stronger than before. New families had arrived from Earth and other colonies to join the survivors. Children played in the streets again. Old people sat in the parks again. A memorial stood in the center of the capital city. It was a simple structure, a white stone wall with names carved into its surface. 555 names in total. Every elder who had been killed. Every child who had been murdered. Governor Linda Morrison's name was at the top. Jake walked to the memorial alone. He was older now, with gray in his hair and lines on his face that had not been there before the war. He had been offered promotions and honors, but he had refused them all. He did not want to be remembered as a war hero. He only wanted to be remembered as someone who had kept his promise. He knelt at the base of the memorial and placed a small photograph against the stone. It showed a 7-year-old girl with bright red hair, a gap-toothed smile, and a paper crown covered in glitter. Jake stayed there for a long time, looking at the photograph. Then he spoke quietly, so that only Lily could hear. He told her that he was sorry he had not been there to protect her. He told her that he had done everything he could to make sure it would never happen again. He told her that humanity would never forget what had been done, and would never allow it to be repeated. He told her that he loved her and missed her every single day. Then he stood up and walked away, leaving the photograph at the base of the memorial. Behind him, the sun set over the rebuilt city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Humanity was not a species to be threatened or controlled. Humanity was a species that protected its own with a love and fury that other civilizations could not comprehend. And anyone who harmed human children would face a reckoning beyond imagination.